Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 6 o'clock and we will go to work. First item on the agenda, consider approving the minutes held from January 27th.
I'd make a motion we approve those minutes, sign the disbursement warrant.
Motion is made, second, all by Bob. All in favor? Thank you. Next item up, Mr. Johnny Java is here tonight to talk about the CBD oil manufacturing. Gary?
I've actually been working on this for days now, Dave Savage and I, and it's just a very confusing situation. And so what I like to do is I would like to turn the floor over to Mr. Jabber and his counsel, and let them start the discussion and conversation. We'll take it from there, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Certainly. Thank you, gentlemen, council members. Good evening. I'm Attorney Andrew Duchette. I have a practice in Portland, Maine. And here on behalf of John Jarber. A little bit of backdrop. This is before you because Mr. Jarber is operating a facility in Waterville, is in the process of trying to expand that facility, and so there's a building here in Oakland, and the business that Mr. Jarber is in the business of hemp processing, so taking farmed, raised hemp plants that are currently existing here in the state of Maine under Maine's industrial hemp law, and then converting that plant into product, in this particular case, hemp oil. In the process of trying to get permitting here in the town of Oakland, that permitting was denied on the basis of that it falls under the Maine Medical Marijuana Act, and currently Oakland doesn't allow for the medical marijuana manufacturing. And I want to reiterate that therein lies the issues, the difference between the business of medical marijuana and then the business of hemp. And those two items are very distinct, at least in my mind. And again, I would agree, if we were in the business of medical marijuana in any of its forms, whether it was retail, producing, manufacturing, processing, that we would not be allowed to, that business would not be permitted here in the town of Oakland, at least currently, because at this point in time, the town of Oakland you didn't opt in, therefore under the statute, until a town opts in to allow such uses, zoned for such uses, medical marijuana and its businesses aren't allowed in those towns. So I would agree in that instance. But again, I think what's confusing several people, and this is not a problem alone for the state of Maine. I think it's a problem that many states are struggling with. In December of 2018, the Farm Bill legalized hemp and removed it as a Schedule I drug. And so it made it much safer for those who want no business in the marijuana business in any of its forms. It made it much safer for those businessmen to now function in the world of hemp, because now it's not federally illegal. I don't want to get too far in the weeds. For example, there's the FDA has said, that's great, you can farm all the hemp you want, but don't be putting it in food yet. And so there's some pieces to that, but at the very least, for a business owner here in Maine who doesn't want to touch marijuana because it's still federally regulated, and despite the fact that the state says it's okay, there's still some risk associated with this. It is allowed those people to take comfort that at least at the federal level, hemp is legal. At the state level, the production of hemp has been legal since 2015, and that current statute's been on the books since 2015, and I've given a handout which kind of brings apart how Maine defines the two different variations of hemp and marijuana. So both, and this is where I think it gets a little confusing. Both hemp and marijuana are derived from the genus species of Cannabis sativa, L. And Maine defines hemp currently has a concentration of THC that does not exceed 0.3% on a driveway basis, and that is grown or processed by a licensed grower. And if you were to go to the Department of Agriculture right now, there's a link for hemp production, and you click on it, you can fill out the form to get licensed as a hemp grower. And that's, I put the citation there, Title 7, Section 2231, subsection 1. Marijuana is defined as, and they don't just define marijuana in this instance, they say the marijuana plant means a plant of the genus cannabis, obviously, including but not limited to cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis, or their hybrids and the seeds of those plants. And then in that same definition, it says marijuana does not include hemp as defined in Title 7, Section 2231, subsection 1. But the issue we have now, and so both marijuana, the marijuana plant as defined by Maine can produce cannabinoids. And probably the most popular two that everybody hears about is THC, one that gets you high, and then CBD, which has become kind of a popular cannabinoid in foods, tinctures, drinks, things of that nature. And CBD, which doesn't get you high. So marijuana can produce both cannabinoids. Hemp also produces both cannabinoids. In this instance, THC levels can exceed 0.3, but it also produces the cannabinoid CBD. And I think that's where, at least at some level, and where the state of Maine, as well as other states are struggling with, is once that oil is derived from a hemp plant, and again, Maine says, provided your license, a person may plant, grow, harvest, possess, process, I'm double underlining process, sell and buy industrial hemp, if that person holds a proper license. So the issue we're having though is when that same person all of a sudden processes a hemp and turns it into oil, and in this case it would be CBD, because that's the highest concentration of cannabinoid that's coming out of it, it's not THC. That somehow that now moves it under the Maine Medical Marijuana Act. And I have spoken with the Maine Municipal Association's attorney. I have not spoken with Town's Council, although I know Phil Saucier very well. I graduated from law school with him. I've talked to him. But for whatever reason, they are somehow saying once it's turned into that oil, it now becomes a marijuana extract. And I don't know how they derived to that definition based on Maine's own definition of the two different plants, hemp and marijuana. And I think that therein lies the confusion. Because again, I would argue that even currently, under current law and how it's defined, if I'm allowed to process hemp, how am I allowed to process it? And then once I've done that, why is now that product changes and now apparently falls under a different statute, falls under the Maine Medical Marijuana Act, which is a whole different statute, whole different rules and regulations, and a whole different round of licensing, whereas you don't have the same thing under hemp. So in my mind, that is the distinction there. And I think, and needless to say, I don't think Mr. Jarber is the only person struggling with this, because very recently, the legislature has taken public comment on an emergency preamble, which would expand the definition of hemp. And as we get into discussions about this, I want to read that definition because maybe that will make everybody feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy. But before, as I indicated in front of you, they just defined it as a concentration of THC that does not exceed 0.3%. They've expanded that to say the hemp plant, which is part of the cannabis sativa L, and then it says any part of that plant, and this is what wasn't in the old statute, including the seeds and all the derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, double underline cannabinoid, isomers, acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or not. And then again, they update the Medical Marijuana Act, in which they've defined marijuana, and once again indicated that marijuana, including marijuana concentrate, does not include hemp as defined in Title VII, Section 2231. So, again, our position is, I would urge the council that, I think under current Maine law and current definition of industrial hemp, which allows for the possession and processing of it, is not regulated under the Maine Medical Marijuana Act. And I would present to you that the town is perfectly able to permit the processing of hemp. Again, that's hemp. I would definitely agree, and to the extent there needs to be further restrictions on Mr. Jarber's business, but he is not in the business of processing medical marijuana, and that can continue to be regulated all day long in the town of Oakland. But in terms of hemp production, I think that's regulated like any other business. So that I would urge the town council to do that. And the alternative, I guess I would urge the town council to, which, so as recently as today, the Maine Agricultural Committee has basically voted ought to pass this emergency preamble. And so once the legislature passes it, presuming that's not vetoed by Governor Janet Mills, then we'd have, I would present to you even greater clarity in regards to the processing of the isolates, resins, and isomers and cannabinoids of the hemp plant. Any questions about any of that? And I'm not a scientist.
Clear as mud. I have, I don't know if you want to call it a question or whatever, but, so you're extracting CBD oil from it, for what purpose?
So one, you're extracting hemp oil.
Hemp oil.
And it happens to contain the cannabinoid CBD.
Yep.
To sell that oil. To whoever wants.
For what purpose?
Well, just sell it for money.
Yeah, well, I understand that. We're doing it for fun.
I think it depends on who's purchasing it. So
Okay,
whether or not they want.
that is my preamble to it, is there's where I find that it goes to the medical marijuana, medical side, is because it could be used as a medicine. So you're saying you don't understand their thoughts of turning it over to the medical side, but that's, you're not just deriving the oil out of it for the fun of it, nothing to do.
No, it could be utilized as a tincture, it could be utilized as
It can be utilized
for
as
whatever
well, but-
purposes.
Right,
And
but if it can be used for medical purposes, that I can see the clear,
Right, but
to me,
we're
it's a
not-
clear distinction.
We're not selling it to, so there isn't a medical marijuana store in the town of Oakland.
Right, no, but I'm saying, you're saying you don't understand how they can turn it to, lean it to the side of the medical marijuana side, which I can see the clear distinction in their mind of that it could be used as medicine. I'm not arguing the
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
I'm just saying, in my mind, I can see where they would come up with that assumption that it could be used as a medicinal purposes, let's say. So,
Well, but I would put back to, I mean, again, I just look at it from a legal definition and a
Yeah.
legal
no,
position as in terms of what's regulated and what's regulated where.
no.
And so it's not, by definition, it's not medical marijuana.
I agree, yeah, no, I'm
And-
just, and I'm
right,
not
and
arguing the
so-
point, I'm just saying,
And so
I can
to-
see
and
how
so
it
then
would
to
be.
say it somehow transforms into medical marijuana as soon as it becomes CBD oil.
Very little of our product, of our finished product, I don't think any of it is sold to the medical, like caregivers coming and buying it from us. Very little is sold in Maine. Most of it is sold to California, Colorado. So it is mostly exported, even to states who don't allow marijuana. But when the Farm Bill passed, opened the doors for us to allow us now to sell and transport.
That was my other question about the transport, is it, and I know very little about that end of it, but it's legal to transport it. I can't buy a bottle of liquor and send it to Texas through the mail or UPS or anything without having a license.
Hemp you can.
You can.
CBD,
I'm with John.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm
Yeah.
Tony Jabber.
Yeah.
I am a scientist. I've worked in regulated products. I started in Monsanto. I'm almost as old as this ban on hemp in 1937. Anyway, So the Farm Bill explicitly says, and let me read this to you, explicitly allows the transfer of hemp-derived products across state lines for commercial purposes. It puts no restrictions on the sale, transport, or possession of hemp-derived products, so long as they are produced in a manner consistent with the law, which is making hemp less than 0.3%. So there's no issue in terms of transport across state lines. This is not, was taken off the DEA Schedule 5 list last September. The confusion is, and you mentioned medical marijuana, the problem with CBD is people have been saying and making medical claims. You are not allowed, and there are two regulatory agencies at play here, the USDA and then the FDA. So the FDA regulates what goes into food. The FDA says you can't put into food whatever the distinction is. CBD would fall under that. It hasn't been approved for any specific uses. You can't market it that way. It doesn't say anything about whether or not you can put it into a balm for your elbow, vapes, or anything like that. It says you can put it into anything that you want so long as you don't make a medical claim. So that's really what that legislation, the new legislation, is designed to express. Now, I had projects going on in New York, California, and Montana, and Florida. And to be honest, they're all kind of struggling with what's going on. But the hemp bill clearly was designed to take hemp, as defined as cannabis less than 0.3%, and open up that market. As a practical matter, this is going to take place. The clarity will come in the next 3 to 6 months. We would just hate to have to wait 6 months to get started on a facility here. So it's clear, at least to me, that this fits the oil that you talked about. It fits in the designation of a hemp-derived product. It's legal to transport across state lines and within this interstate. We don't sell retail products, we don't make retail products. And so the obligation to the person that markets retail product, the ship goes to them, or the onus goes to them to determine whether or not they're in compliance with the FDA regulation.